Good afternoon and welcome to today's episode of the Freight Insider Podcast, where we are opening the doors to the business of freight. I'm your host, Paige Siplon. I always say that freight is the common denominator in this complicated math problem that we call our economy. Literally every business is touched by freight, but how it touches us and how it touches companies really varies greatly. Some exist to move the freight, others track it, some manufacture it, while others receive it and share it with consumers and other businesses. The business of freight is complicated, exciting, and frankly, all too well kept of a secret weapon for business. Today, I have a really special guest joining me, an old friend, you could say. He has over 30 years of experience in manufacturing and marketing paper and tissue products, packaging, cellulose, specialty fibers, building products, and a whole bunch of other related materials. The list is long for sure. Starting with the company in 1989, he relocated to Europe from Atlanta in 92 and has led many divisions of his company for many years. In 2017, he was named president and CEO of Georgia Pacific. Today's guest is Mr. Christian Fischer. Welcome to the Freight Insider, Christian.
Paige, happy to be here. Thanks very much. And so good to reconnect with you.
It's been too long. It's been a while. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We've got a lot of great content to cover and a lot of great stories about your journey and about your Georgia Pacific's journey when it comes to freight. Just sort of kick things off, like we were discussing before the show started, we like to start off with your own personal freight journey and kind of where you built up to where you are now as CEO and president of Georgia Pacific. But, interesting, I was in the Marine Corps and I often joke that I used to be freight and was shipped around the country and shipped around the world as cargo, as freight. And you grew up in Germany. Your Southern accent sort of gives that away, but you lived in Brazil. But I know you've got an interesting story of actually kind of being freight yourself and getting over here to the United States on a cargo vessel. Tell us a little more about that beginning of your journey together.
Yeah, thanks, Paige. Indeed. When I was about 19, 20, I had finished high school in Brazil, and I knew, for whatever reason, I knew that I needed to go back to Germany, where I grew up as a kid up to the age of 10 to go to university. And at that time, air tickets were just more of a luxury good than they are today to many of us. And neither did my mom have that much money to kind of, splurge on an airline ticket. But at the age of 20, you got time, right? And I had time. So I had heard from a friend that you could actually get over the Atlantic Ocean from Brazil to Europe on a cargo ship, a container vessel. You qualified to work on there. So you had to work while you're on. At that time, it took, I don't know, more than 2 weeks, maybe 17 days, I don't remember. And, all you had to get on, and then you had to work yourself over that, and that was it. And I said, wow, that's what I'm going to do. And after a few attempts, I really got hired. I remember one thing painfully, Paige. I had just, I think, broken or at least severely injured. I think it was the ring finger of my right hand, and I'm a right-hander. And I'm saying, well, that's going to bode very well for physical labor for 2 days. But of course, I couldn't tell anybody about that.
Right.
And as soon as I greeted the captain and he squeezed my hand, I was just saying, oh my gosh, this is going to be a long trip. Anyway, but really, so container vessel, and as the guy on the bottom of the totem pole, you get to do all the work that nobody else wants to do. And this was like cleaning out rust, painting, fixing little things, washing the deck every day, and so on and so forth. You get a little bit of insult and injury too from the crew that says, oh, here's the new guy, let's throw a bucket of water on him at 6 a.m., that kind of stuff, right?
But it's good work ethic for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, this was, I would just say, my first personal, longer, more intimate journey, if you will, really figuratively and really with freight, where I felt a little bit like you. I was part of the cargo, if you will. But many learnings. Of course, I picked a few things up about how a vessel works and what it does and etc. Right, that freight piece, if you will. But secondly, I would just say the lessons there too, and the respect that you build for the people that are in that profession of making freight happen. In this case, people on a boat, the crew. But it's not hard to connect that to pilots that spend a lot of time away from their family, to truck drivers who spend endless days and weeks on roads, etc., you really gain a lot of respect for the personal sacrifice and contributions these people in those professions make. And last but not least, you learn something about life on there too. And you learn how big the ocean is, because there's nothing else to see for 17 days or so.
Yeah.
So anyway, I leave it at that. But again, a journey that really made freight come alive for me. Paige.
You're right. It's a people business for sure, and I think it's probably why you're partly such a great leader at Georgia Pacific and everything you've done through your journey. Learning about the people first and foremost, and that it is a people business. We joke in the trucking industry, those trucks don't drive themselves, right?
No,
I mean,
not yet.
it's coming. It's a whole other podcast we can do,
Right.
but it's certainly a people business. So you got to Brazil, and then you continued your journey professionally. I have in my notes here, you were a market pulp sales manager, which I guess describes itself. Tell us kind of where you went from there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd even start a little bit earlier, but it's just for context and not to bore your audience. But when I then got to Germany and I needed a job to get me through college on the other side, I found a job in a Brazilian pulp company, and that's how I got into the pulp or cellulose business. And this was a small office, 4 or 5 people that managed all aspects of selling and distributing the product in Europe. And as in such a role, you get into everything, right? Because it's just too small an office to kind of compartmentalize things. So one of the tasks I had was cargo inspection, bill of lading reconciliation or distribution, booking freight. That could be truck, that could be inland marine transportation, you name it. I got into that. When I got into 5 years later, I was hired by Georgia Pacific in Europe as a pulp sales manager. Also, very small office, I would say, with more capability coming back out of the United States, but still a heavy element of what I described in my earlier job. And so I think the more of the story here, this was my upbringing, if you will, and learning in freight business was by doing. By looking around, by learning a lot from freight forwarders, from truckers, from boat people, etc. And it was a kind of, a super education in that context. And I think the other thing you learned, that I learned, is how important that is to actually service your customers well.
Yeah, and actually doing it. You don't learn that in college. You don't get that out of a textbook.
I don't think so. I didn't.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of great leaders are like that, who have done it. You look at the stories that have been told about UPS, for example. All the executives in your role at CEO started off as a driver, and Home Depot. I know Mark Holifield, who we both know well, spends time going into the stores and interacting with customers and really getting down to the grassroots, if you will. I think it's an important part of all the freight journeys that we've talked about with guests. So then we fast forward. You've had multiple roles, and people can check out the website and read your bio, the different roles you've had over the years, a long tenure with Georgia Pacific, and now you're the president and CEO. Just for our audience's background, unless they've been asleep under a rock, Georgia Pacific is one of the largest consumers of forest and consumer product, largest manufacturer of consumer and forest products, nearly 30,000 employees based in Atlanta. Georgia Pacific operates 3 key businesses: building products, lumber, plywood, panels, wallboards, packaging and cellulose, containerboard, boxes, and consumer products, bath tissue, paper towels, disposable plates, cups, cutlery, variety of other consumer products, both for the home and away from home. Georgia Pacific's big brands include Angel Soft, Quilted Northern, Brawny, Dixie Cups. Really, if you're looking at a paper product or anything consumable in the grocery store or at the Home Depot, it's probably made, or Georgia Pacific has their hands in it as well. Georgia Pacific is part of Koch Industries, one of America's largest private companies. And so with all that going on and all that freight moving around, it seems like sort of a rhetorical question, but why is freight so important to Georgia Pacific? I mean, you're not a logistics company, but it seems like you couldn't do what you do without freight and logistics.
No, number one, first of all, you've done your homework. You summarized what GP does and where we are.
Easy to do.
Great. Yeah, and the only thing I add is, again, most of our manufacturing, and that's key to you to answer your question, Paige, is actually done in the United States. But again, we source materials for it, and we ship our goods all over the globe.
Mm-hmm.
So we make a lot of stuff, we buy a lot of stuff, and we ship a lot of stuff, and that's where freight comes in. So really, I mean, it's I would just say this. I mean, we couldn't do what we do if we didn't know the business of freight well. Although I don't know, we probably own a couple of flatbed trucks and some rail cars here and there, but you know that pales into comparison about what we ship every day. But we got to do it really well, be really knowledgeable, and it is a source of, you know, competitive advantage. One, I mean, if you don't pay attention to that, with the billions of dollars we spend in a year of, again, moving stuff around, then you can be uncompetitive. And two, it's really, I mean, it's the key to serve your customers well. And I think these are the two key takeaways, Paige, so that you say, without it and without knowing it, we couldn't be successful.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, freight, I mean, just a couple stats here that you had, 1,800 trucks coming into your facilities every weekday, 5,000 loads of logs, 1,500 loads of chips every weekday, 50 million pounds of finished goods coming in out of your facilities. It's information that your team has provided. Just incredible. And you talked about serving the customer. I mean, those are all things your customers are depending on, whether it's, toilet paper during a pandemic and other times for sure. Whether it's logs and for our building communities, it's huge what you guys do. So our understatement of probably the century saying you guys ship a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
Most about everything. So tell me a little bit more. So obviously freight is a big focus of your role and your many employees and your team's role. But what are some of the things that Georgia Pacific is focusing on from a freight perspective or a freight related perspective these days in particular?
Yeah, Paige, I always like to start at 100,000-foot level, because if people get that, then they know what guides our thinking and actions and everything.
Good.
Not always perfectly, but that's the intent and the aspiration. What we, and some of that is timeless, if you will, but sometimes you really need to, again, refocus as an organization on those things. So at the highest level, Paige, what comes to mind is really making sure that all of our employees, but also our business partners, understand one thing. What we are really focused on and intentional and purposeful on is to fulfill the best in how we interpret the role of a business in society, plain and simple.
Right.
But what is that for us? Well, it is to really help our customers improve their lives, in the space that we're in, right? And where we can make a difference. That doesn't mean we alone will change their lives, but we will help them improve their lives. One, and how? Well, by giving them better alternatives than they otherwise have, one. And two, and this is very, very important, because at the heart of it, it has the message of stewardship, and some people call it sustainability, but that is doing that while consuming fewer resources. So, you don't waste stuff, you take care of the environment, you really are thoughtful about how you produce things, and so on and so forth. Very key. So focus on that. Within that, you have a vision where you say, and that's what I meant by from time to time, you got to refocus the organization on that even more so than in the past, maybe, which is the focus on the customer. Your most important constituency. They pay the bills. If we don't have them, everything else becomes fiction. So focus on the customer pretty well. And how do you focus on the customer very well? Well, you are guided by a couple of, call it, principles or underlying key things that you always got to keep in your mind. One is just to say, hey, look, we're only working here for mutual benefit, because if the customer doesn't take any benefit from dealing with us, I mean, all bets off. Two, you try to actually, again, give them better alternatives, which means what you're really trying to do is become their preferred supplier. We call that develop those preferred partnerships. But they got to choose you as the preferred partner. It's not just you choosing them. So you got to do that. And, and the better alternatives in a world that we interpret today as moving faster, changing faster, being disrupted more fast, including on freight, more than ever in history, certainly in most of our lives. You just say, well, I gotta stay really in tune with what's changing and embrace something which is key here, which is a concept of we are in this game called perpetual transformation. Don't transform once and then think I've arrived. No, you got to perpetually transform because the world's transforming, and otherwise you don't serve your customers with better alternatives. That's that. And the last thing I'll say to that is, of course you try to, I say, of course, I want to call it out. There's more constituencies than your customers, but I started with the customer. But obviously, if you're not a good partner and the best partner in the community in which you produce, if you're not a good, a preferred partner of regulators, if you're not a best partner of suppliers, well, then again, you'll become weaker in servicing your customers. But the absolute key, without which none of that happens, is our employees. So really creating the environment where everyone can actually, to the best of their specific innate capabilities, contribute to the success and have a personal journey of transformation and ultimately fulfillment, and we call it self-actualization, then all bets are off. So we're focusing very much, and maybe we'll talk more about that, focusing very much on creating that environment where that is not just a bunch of nice words, but where that is really lived every day.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, that status quo is, to use my words, status quo can be a killer for business. I don't care if you're a paper company or not. I mean, even technology companies. I love the way you describe transformation of your business, but also transforming and continually evolving your culture. You talked about your employees. I know, not to jump ahead too far, because I'm sure the pandemic and how it's affected your company will come up. But companies are transforming themselves now from a culture perspective on how they need to better serve their employees as their customers, right? Because you got to, like you said, you think of them as customers as well. We've gone to more of a hybrid role here in our office here at Team One Logistics, and it'd be interesting to hear how you are moving along. But so talk a little bit about what you're most excited about. What are some of the maybe pet projects, if you can talk about them, or, what are you most excited about at Georgia Pacific, now into the short-term future?
Yeah, well, and you can always follow up with more questions here and more specificity if your audience likes that. But there's a lot of, call it tactical or even structural stuff going on in our markets as we interpret it. That is really exciting, right? I mean, one of them is coming out of the pandemic. For example, while people bought enough toilet paper along the way, and now are kind of destocking to kind of normalize what they have in their pantry for good reasons. One trend seems to be sticking around, which is a higher sensitivity, need, want, appreciation for hygiene in general. So we see a lot of that in our away from home business, where people say, hey, look, I had something else on my wall or nothing. It could be an air blower, or it could be, you just took towels out of a stack to dry your hands. I now want it to be not air blowing around there and disseminating germs or something like that. But I want it to be good paper towels, but I don't want to touch the device from which they come. So there's a lot of more emphasis, renewed emphasis on touchless hygiene, let's put it away from home, but also in terms of our towel business. And, my competitors, from the best we can tell, are seeing the same thing, right? Is people are just using more of that one-time cleanliness aid, call it a paper towel to dry your hands, to wipe off stuff more often at home. And we think that's a trend that will stay. To what extent and for how long, don't know. But anyway, so that's pretty exciting. How do you position yourself to take advantage of that? The other one, I could mention certainly about our building products business, where, it's just fascinating to see how much of an emphasis and spend and focus people had put during the pandemic, or during the worst part of the pandemic, in putting money back into their house and, repair, remodel, etc. That alone could have kept us busy. And now you get this pent up demand on housing that who knows how long that will stay around, Paige, but it's just absolutely crazy. And how do you position yourselves to service your customers better in that? And last but not least, just to have one example for another business, I mean, obviously more stuff is landing in our doorsteps day to day, right? We all got accustomed to, hey, ship it home, right?
Right.
And so more boxes are landing at our doorsteps every day. And I mean, that in itself is a very, very interesting opportunity, but also challenge, because people say, oh, that's good. But oh, now I have all these boxes at home, and is it going to waste, or how do you think about that? And there's a little guilt out there. So great opportunities to work with, the broader consumer base to take advantage of that. But I put all those in tactical. I go back to a couple of things. What I really feel super excited about is, one, that transformation in that world that's going on and changing so fast. Does it cause some stress on me and my people? You bet. You bet. It's a question of survival, but of course we want to thrive. But of course there's always tension in it. But the transformation and going through all that change in our lifetime right now so fast, and trying to figure out, how to position myself, super exciting. Secondly, again, we talk about these preferred partnerships. I think when you have that purpose and deliberately pursue it, to really go deeper and say, what does this mean? And what do I really do differently and better? So all these different constituents choose us to be their preferred partner. I think that is, super exciting, a journey. And last but not least, I go back to the people and saying, enabling the 30,000 people, but also our business partners, to really contribute to the best that they can.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you actually wake up in the morning and say, this is my mission? Because from that, good stuff will happen. Just trust that it will happen. I think that gets me out of the bed in the morning.
Yeah, well, I think the first step is getting out of bed in the morning and saying, this is my mission, and then going, like you're talking about, and having to execute on it. I mean, that's key. So you talk a lot about transformation, both, again, I think really important, not just from a business perspective, but from a culture perspective, and transforming to make your workplace a better place to drive your internal customers, as well as your employees, as well as your external customers. What are some other examples of the way you're transforming your approach to freight and supply chain, partnership-wise, perhaps, and how you're transforming your supply chains, how you handle freight?
Well, I'll start by saying this again. Go back to what you observed. I mean, we do a lot of freight, but we don't own any.
That's right.
And as big and important a facet component is of our daily business, we know that we don't have all the answers. So it's been a few years ago, maybe it's decades. I don't remember, because I wasn't in the consumer business at that time, Paige, our consumer business. But they had developed an in-house capability, which they call KBX Logistics. It's still called KBX today.
Right.
And KBX used to handle the freight for the consumer business division. Today, it's kind of morphed, if you will, evolved into a capability that handles the freight, not just for all of GP, but also for all of Koch Industries.
Oh, wow.
And on top of that, the capability, which gives us, we're convinced, actually, in many aspects, a competitive edge, is also being brought forth and to third parties out there. Anybody who wants to do business with us. Those can be customers, they can be suppliers, and a lot of partners, obviously, that have the hard stuff, the rail, the trucks, and so on and so forth. We live by the partnerships and the mutual benefit, again, that we create with those folks, right? I mean, other than that, it would be a one-sided story, and it would be a short-term story. So by allowing KBX to be the capability that leverages our scale, but also the information they have, and being call it a one-stop point of access and cooperation with our vendors in freight, is one of those things. And it's through those cooperations, quite frankly, that you again create capabilities that would otherwise be outside of our own and would never get there. So a couple of examples maybe that are not always directly related to KBX, but things on how we think about that and practice this. So one example, I mean, stay within KBX for a second. I mean, with KBX and the business, you can obviously cooperate very, very transparently with one another because we work for the same owner. So we're in the same sandbox, if you will, right?
Right.
So by cooperating with KBX, we actually contributed to them developing a smart logistics freight system that helps schedule and avoid empty trucks going back and forth, optimize freight between different point suppliers and buyers. And you know, I would not give you the right number of mileage and hours and gallons of fuel saved page, but it goes into the millions of miles spent, trucking hours spent, fumes exhausted are not put into the air.
Sure.
And this is real money saved. So again, here, good business and good environmental outcomes on top of that, right? And benefiting the broader society. And you know, it got many EPA awards for smart freight, et cetera, that we're proud of. But again, great work as an example. Another one that goes a little bit, again, more into the innovation side, cooperating with a third party. In this case, Outrider is the name of the company. And Outrider, we have a lot of warehouses out there in distribution centers, some attached to our facilities, some not. So one of the areas that is always a challenge and gives us a lot of headache, not just from operational side, but also from a safety side, is those yards where a lot of empty trucks sit and get paired around with cargo and move up to the facility and get loaded and unloaded and get spotted, etc. Very tricky environment, very challenging environment. With Outrider, they developed a capability that we're piloting right now that essentially gets all the people out of that business. And through sensors and self-driving vehicles and software and algorithms, etc., they get the job done better and without putting anybody in jeopardy. So that's just one of the experiences we said that again, we couldn't come up with that. And they need a place, a lab, where people are saying, I'm going to be willing to try that out. So that's a second example. And a third one is, you know, a company that since I think recently they've actually been acquired by somebody else, so they must have done a good job, and maybe we helped them do a little bit of that. Is the company is called Clear Metal, and Clear Metal started out at least with an edge to say go back to shipping. And our cellulose business that ships 70% of their business outside the United States in containers and other boats,
right?
For any country around the world, pretty much. But really, did we know when our cargo would actually arrive at the customers early, late, or on time? No, we only knew once the customers told us, which been, well, at that time they knew, but that's not how things trick today. Clear Metal had developed a really smart way of anticipating, probably better than even the ocean freight liners and the logistics folks in between and the customers and ourselves, about when that boat would get, or the cargo would arrive at your dock and ultimately at your destination. So by working with them, we were really able to make a big difference page on, you know, giving our customers more visibility and tools to plan their operations and the purchases by cooperating with a third party. So those are some concrete examples of how we work also with others.
Those are great examples. You know, the transparency of information. We've talked about supply chain visibility, you know, in the textbooks at Georgia Tech, right, and other places. But sometimes, you know, that information is even more valuable from the cost perspective than the actual cargo it's carrying sometimes, and that knowledge can be real power. I'll back up to you mentioned transformation, you mentioned sustainability, and being in the forest products industry. I know sustainability is a cornerstone of your business and all your business lines. I'll fill in a couple gaps here because I happen to have these numbers in front of me. So going back to the KBX and the transformations that KBX has brought to all of Koch Industries, but GP in particular, it allowed you to cut 4 million unnecessary non-revenue miles for 2,000 drivers, saving 600,000 gallons of diesel and eliminating engine idling at our facilities. Saved 400,000 gallons between 2018. That removed 4,200 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. And I'll brag for you, since you're a humble guy, those are numbers that are plausible and very admirable, and I think worth putting out there. And you've had 3 different EPA SmartWay awards.
And I think that is a great
job of giving you the data. So.
Yeah, I think that is a great example of, again, going back to the role of business in society, and where I tell you, and consuming fewer resources. I mean, this goes hand in hand, right? You provide better alternative and you consume fewer resources. There's your textbook example.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect example, and not to throw those numbers in there, but I think our audience really needs to hear how big of an impact that your company is really having on that number of many products and actually doing it in a sustainable fashion, for sure. So you talked a little bit we talked about transformation. Green is I don't even know if they use the word green anymore, but sustainability. Green for business too, right? I mean, because it doesn't have to be red. It can create black for your business from a profitability perspective. How, in your words, do you think winning at that transformation, from whatever perspective, how do you think that's going to help shape the future of your young company?
The young company, yeah, we're pushing 100 years.
You're an old startup, right?
Yeah, that's right. 1927, if I get that right. So soon to be 100. But I like to say this, Paige, that there is really no alternative but this perpetual transformation. There just isn't. Because if you believe that the world is in constant creative destruction, is always around us, sometimes faster, sometimes broader, sometimes slower, etc., but it's always around us, you have no alternative to transforming. And there may be a lot of details buried in it, but if we go back to the S&P 500 and look at who was around 20 years ago and who is not around today, I mean, 50% of those companies that were there 20 years ago are gone. Now, some of them may have been absorbed by others, etc. But okay, but it tells you a pretty big story that not transforming is just not an alternative. So that's number one. And and therefore, I think, Paige, to make that really come alive to our 30,000 people, but also our partners in business, is key. And that's one thing. And number two is, so basically, you're never done, folks. We're never done. But if you think about, wow, it's happening so fast and it's all the time, how do I survive without just going like I break up, I explode, I can't do it anymore? Well, I think this is where, again, we need to create an environment where we, including myself, understand that, look, we're running a marathon, but within that marathon, you have a lot of sprints. But you can't just sprint all the time, 100% of the time, all the time. You just blow up. I mean, at least that's what I believe.
You won't make it.
To make people believe, hey, you're never done. You always got to transform. Amongst those things, there's projects, there's transformation things that you got to be really fast, and you got to make efficient, make your mistakes early, right? Figure out what doesn't work. That's part of that, and not get discouraged by it. I mean, that is key in there. And again, who is going to make it happen but individuals? You've got to bring this point home, that for people to feel excited about this, embrace it, know that they're constantly learning, and that the company is there, really not just in words, but they're in actions to help you, to enable you to do the journey yourself. I mean, that's how we will win at this end transformation thing, make it really meaningful to people.
No, you're right. I mean, that transformation is key. And that's part of why we're doing this podcast, is to share that story. I think, and I've talked about it publicly for years, that we have a problem of perception in our industry, in freight and supply chain, trucking in particular, where we have major shortfalls in the number of professional drivers that we need. But, and that impacts your business, it impacts everyone. So how do we get that message out there? It's part of the reason we wanted to hear your personal freight journey and get people excited. Freight is sexy. I think, freight, when we need to be able to tell that story and get great people into your business and into, the logistics industry and into manufacturing companies that really get it and are excited about transforming and the innovation that is inherent as part of the supply chain.
Yeah,
sure. So that said, that problem of perception, that communication issue that we've had, and this is a decades-old problem. I'm telling that story. So you've been at this for a minute, 30-year journey on container ships and from Brazil and Germany and through the ranks at Georgia Pacific. If you were going to go back to, the Christian Fischer getting ready to shake that pilot's hand and have him crush your broken finger, what would you be telling him as sort of some tips and tricks or things you've learned along the way that would help guide some of the younger folks and others that are just starting their freight journey today?
Well, a combination of things comes to mind. Let me reach back the furthest first. I think, like on anything, and freight, and we agree, right? Especially if you're in a manufacturing business and you really live off making stuff and ultimately delivering stuff to someone and buying stuff to make all that happen, etc. Right. You can't not think about freight as an existential and competitive advantage and a means to better serve your customers. One. That's right. So I would challenge anyone who is in that world. I'm just saying, hey, do your own personal journey, whatever it might be. Hey, I don't know if that's driving on a truck or working somewhere. I mean, find a little bit more of that personal connection to it to have a deeper appreciation. It won't make you an expert unless you want to go on that trajectory, but it gets you some grounding. It gets you some appreciation. It creates some respect. And I think then you can build it from there. So that's the number one. Hey, for simple thing, for show business, I would just say, hey, make your own journey, take the boat, is what I would say.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so that's number one. But number two, and to the challenges, but also opportunities that we've been talking about in general, but also in freight. I mean, hey, look, I could look at glass half empty, glass half full, and all this stuff, right? All the changes and the stuff we've been joking about or referring, hey,
they're real.
Driver shortage. Well, maybe tomorrow, whenever tomorrow is, maybe there won't be drivers, or it will be restricted. Now you can restrict it, meaning fewer drivers for different uses. Maybe, I don't know. So there will be disruptive elements, and there are disruptive elements out there. And those changes will change how we do business, right? Hey, look, if drone deliveries become that much important, if self-driving cars, forget trucks, delivered to the home and at a different cost structure, right? And they can always be circling because you don't have a driver that gets exhausted, etc. Right. The database or the data that can be gleaned off all those touch points and freights, etc., and optimized locally and around the world through additional visibility. You just say, on the one hand, you can say, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible. Yeah, it will disrupt some businesses for sure, especially those that don't transform. But on the other, how exciting is it? How much opportunity does it create? And it creates a super opportunity for people that want to learn and apply and try something new to do just that. And it opens new worlds that are super, super exciting. I think that's the story, and that's what I would emphasize in here, and that's what we're all trying to embrace and constantly learn what's out there.
Yeah, no, keep your eye on the ball and just start the journey. There's so many different pathways that, whether you're, like you said, manufacturing. I said it at the intro to this podcast. It's the whole idea. It's a complicated ecosystem, whether you manufacture it or ship it or track it or make it, logistics and the different paths that young folks and older folks can get into and be part of as part of their freight journey. Well, Christian, this has been great. if people want to get engaged, if they want to join your team, I can imagine many would want to come work for you and your team at Georgia Pacific, or one of the other partners that you mentioned. How can they connect with you to reach out and learn more about Georgia Pacific or some of your other partners?
Well, I mean, so since you touched on two dimensions, I'll answer at least on those two very briefly. Look,
Okay.
when it comes to the business of freight, selling cargo, buying cargo, just you got an idea, but I got something that that you guys might be interested in, willing to try, etc., can solve your problem. Go to KBX. Simple. Go to kbx.com, figure out. They will respond. They're very responsive. That is their business. So that's number one. Number two, if it is more on the personal level, and hey, it would always be great in the context of we want to be, the employer of choice. If anybody says, wow, that sounds like an interesting company, and you really look for a specific job, well, I'm just saying, hey, look, it's easy to go jobs at GP or jobs at Koch Industries, and whoop, there's more than you care to know in terms of
Sure.
what's out there. And we got lots of openings that we have, and we'd love for people to show interest and connect to us. And last but not least, but in that same vein about getting to know more people. Hey, look, in many places, at least 150 across the nation, and especially also in Atlanta, you're bound to know somebody who knows somebody at GP or Koch Industries. If you want to know more about the company and opportunities and how we can cooperate, hey, just ask around, you'll find somebody, and that somebody will connect you with the right person. So I hope that we triggered or strengthened some of the interest in our company. It's a great one to work in. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been there for 32 years.
Yeah, it's a testament to how great of a company that you're running now and that you've been part of for so long. And I would argue creating how great it is today.
Thank you.
Christian, this has been fantastic. I've got 100 more questions, and I'm sure our audience does. I'd love to dig into the KBX some more and get into some more details there. Maybe we can continue that conversation in a later podcast with some of your colleagues. This has been great. Hopefully you enjoyed listening. Christian, thanks again for your time. On behalf of the Freight Insider Podcast, thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed listening to Christian and other executives like Christian, make sure you like us and follow us so you don't miss anything. And remember, as Christian said, enjoy your own personal freight journey. Thank you.